I think the problem here is that it's difficult to see how you could have a settlement that both parties would accept. The demands that Russia make are such that Ukraine is unlikely to accept them. And it may also be more difficult for other states to agree to such terms, especially since the United Nations General Assembly has condemned the Russian occupation. So I think there are many things that we can learn from previous conflict, but it's difficult to know much in the early days of the conflict precisely because the military situation on the ground is so difficult to read. I think a lot of the press coverage now focuses on the Ukrainian resistance, and it's easy to understand that people are outraged about the invasion and impressed with the brave response of Ukraine. But at the same time, it's also clear that Russia is making major advances, especially in the south. And the initial force balance is such that it's difficult to see how Ukraine would be able to contain Russia in the long run, even if it may be more difficult than perhaps Russia anticipated to bring the government to its knees.
Yes.
Well, I think the West is in a somewhat difficult position, and it tries to balance two objectives, which are not necessarily compatible. On the one hand, they clearly want to support the Ukrainian position and impose costs on Russia. And this might help the Ukrainian government resist, but that might also prolong the war. And in some sense, if you wanted to shorten the war, it may come down to a question of how much control or de facto control of the Russians are you willing to accept. If you're willing to accept Russia holding on to Crimea, some kind of implicit guarantees that Ukraine will not join NATO, and that Russia can maintain control over the separatist republic and maybe more, then the conflict could probably be settled relatively soon. The problem with that is that it's a terms of settlement or quote unquote peace that many countries will find unacceptable. Mm-hmm. So we have a long body of research on sanctions, and I think this is fairly conclusive that if you have to impose sanctions, then it's quite unlikely that they will have an impact on the target in changing its behavior. That's not to say that sanctions never work. Sometimes the threat of sanction can have a big impact and deter a certain kind of behavior. But once you're at the point where you are imposing the sanction, then it's unlikely that it would lead to a change in the opponent.